How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us. And that's what the I Am Real world's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. Brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, welcome everyone to Chasing Giants, episode 53. I'm Terry Peer with Don Higgins on February 28th with a snap of a finger. It seems like February is already past there, Don.
Yeah, it's been a busy February for me. I was just counting up today. I did 25. I visited 25 different properties in February for consulting visits. And once again, I'm talking to you from a motel room. This time I'm in Plymouth, Indiana, and going to look at some properties this way tomorrow. But you're right, February flew by.
Yeah, it seems like as years go on, you would think that we would figure out ways not to be on the road as much and not to be as busy as what we are, but it seems like every year it just keeps getting more and more and more.
Well, doors of opportunity keep opening, and I just I can't ignore it. When an opportunity comes along, I've got to jump on it and make the most of it.
Right. So you're in Indiana. I think you were on the road a couple times this week, but got to sleep in your own bed. Any interesting things happen on properties that you saw this week?
There's one thing that's kind of struck me over the past 3 or 4 weeks, actually, and especially on a couple of specific properties. These properties set up very well for growing big deer. I mean, I think it'd be pretty easy to set up a sanctuary and the food plots and everything that's needed to grow big deer, but they did not set up well at all for hunting. And, there's two parts to killing big deer, especially on your own land. First, you got to grow them, and then you got to kill them. And some properties don't set up well for either, or maybe they set up and they hunt well, but, it's laid out in such a way that the neighbors get to kill a lot of those bucks before they reach maturity. And then the properties I'm talking about, I think you could grow them there easy enough, but the properties just don't lay out for hunting. And some of it is access and wind direction and things like that. The number of good stand sites are just very limited. So, it's just something that struck me over the past couple of weeks on a couple of different properties.
Well, that's a great question because we get asked at trade shows or submitted questions or private messages, advice on all kinds of properties. And you're right. Sometimes we just have to accept the fact that some properties just don't have what it takes. Doesn't mean you can't have fun on it and hunt it. And for some people, it might be the only property they have. But you gotta hunt where big bucks are. And you got to hunt smart enough to keep the big bucks there, and finding those properties are not always real easy.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, a lot of properties have one or the other, and a lot of them will have both. That you're able to grow them and kill them. But if you're lacking on one, it makes it a whole lot tougher.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit later in this episode about an update on the raffle that we're going to do, where people are going to be able to raffle, buy tickets to hunt my property or yours. They're going to laugh when they see mine because we basically, early season I have a whole lot more, I guess, different spots I can hunt over the alfalfa. But once that alfalfa goes dormant, We've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. It's a matter of discipline, and I've been more successful on this piece of property, and I've hunted it less just because I'm only in there in certain conditions, and people just have to keep that in mind. Some properties just don't allow you to hunt every single day.
Right, and if they laugh at yours, they're going to be scratching their head when they see mine. Well, it just doesn't look like the type of place that's going to crank out big bucks, year after year, but it sure does.
But, the difference in our properties is the way they lay, and you can access yours from almost every direction for different winds, and I have one direction I can go in and out. So, evaluating those pieces of property like what you're doing helping these clients, how often do you go to talk to one of your consulting clients and they just don't want to accept the fact of what you're telling them? Does that happen quite a bit?
Yeah, and usually it's not. Usually it's the response I get in that situation is that I just don't hear from them again.
Yeah.
I lay out the plan, and it's like if a client is really interested in taking his property to the ultimate level, they follow up with questions. And I tell all my clients, your success is my success. I want you to be successful, and I want you to lean on me every step of the way. So call every time you have questions, or email every time you got questions. And strangely enough, there's just it's a small percentage, but there's some that you never hear from again. And I can tell when I go to a property, I can typically tell within about 30 minutes if this client is going to get it and he's going to get on board, or if it's going to be a struggle the whole way. And, some people just have, the ideas in their head that he just can't get past. And,
well, there's two comments I have there. You're probably weeding out a lot of the people that aren't open to what your game plan is by how you kind of filter and vet out potential clients, because you're not wasting your time, their time, or their money if you don't think it's a potential that you can help. So you're probably vetting some of that stuff out. But, the second piece to that is it's the famous story where you try to give somebody advice and then they argue with you on what your advice was and say, well, but in 1994, I shot a XYZ buck. And I think what your MO has tried to be with your consulting clients over the years is not just once every 10 to 15 years they shoot a giant, but every year they have the opportunity to kill the biggest buck on that property. So just a little bit of different mindset that you see when you're dealing with people, and for the most part, I think you got a really good list of clients that have proven that the effort that they're putting in on the property with your plan usually helps. So you're going to be in Indiana part of the week this week, but you got to trek out west to the Iowa Deer Classic, I think, here coming up next weekend, right?
Yeah, I'm going to leave a couple days early and look at some properties out in Iowa, and on my way to the Deer Classic, be speaking there next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then I'm actually going to stay Monday in Iowa following the Deer Classic, because I got permission to hunt a piece of property that's supposed to have a giant on it. And it's just a miracle that I got permission, but it's actually through a very good friend of mine in Iowa who kind of went to bat for me and put a good word in with the landowner and got me permission on this property. So I'm going to stop in there and meet the landowner, hopefully take him out for lunch or breakfast or something, and then do some scouting on that property, pick out some stand sites, maybe even find a shed antler or something.
Yeah. So for all of you all who are making the trek or going to be at the Iowa Deer Classic, stop by and see Don. I won't be able to make it. Softball is in full swing here, so not an opportunity with the master classes coming up that I can get away for that many days and that long of a trip. It's a haul for me to get all the way out there from Kentucky. So stop in and see Don. Is there going to be a real world dealer at that show, Don? Do you know?
Yeah, there is. Actually, Larry Heron is going to have a booth right next to my booth at the Iowa Deer Classic. So if anybody wants to pick up real world product, just get on the Real World website and look for Larry Heron. I think his business name is Heron's Critters.
That's right.
He's out of Webster City, Iowa. Get on the Real World dealer locator, look for Larry Heron, Webster City, Iowa, and put your order in with him. And I'm sure he'll be glad to take care of you.
It always helps when guys who are, and we've been in this spot, we don't run a lot of booths anymore, but it always helps when these guys that are packing up for the booth, the people that are going to come by at the show, they give them a heads up so they know what to take and how much. And each show's a little bit different, so they can leave some stuff out in the trailer or the truck and not have to have you packing around the premise of the show hall and stuff like that. So always better to give those guys a call ahead of time and let you know what you're stopping to pick up. But anyway, stop in and see Don. The other housekeeping thing is I wanted to give everybody kind of an update on the fundraiser. But first, Don and I have been contacted continuously about people that want to help and chip in and donate stuff, and it's just awesome to see the people kind of getting behind all of this.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Terry, there's not a day goes by that someone doesn't reach out to me and want to help.
So, yeah, I mean, we've had there's already been stuff sent to Don's house to add to the raffle. I'm kind of telling people just sit tight while we're working out some logistics, but I think you even had another offer from a taxidermist to mount the deer, right?
Yeah, Justin Nice, Teener's Taxidermy, not far from my house, has agreed to donate a deer mount. So that's going to be one of the things that's going to be raffled off. The Easy Climb Tree Stand or Tree Step Company has donated a bunch of camera mounts for trail cameras. Most of you have heard of the Easy Climb Tree Steps. I've been using them for probably 40 years.
Yep.
Best tree step ever made. And those folks were gracious enough to donate to this raffle as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things that will be part of this raffle before it's done.
Quiet Cat's already stepped up and said they'd be willing to send stuff. Lone Wolf is in. We're going to have a lot of different things on there in addition to the Velvet Hunt opening weekend of Kentucky Archery on my place, and then probably either a late October or a late season bow hunt on Don's place. There'll be a lot of other stuff on there. So as far as an update on where we stand, it always comes down to the government, and not to bash them or anything, but basically in order to run raffles online, you have to go through different services that require a collection method to the payment, and PayPal does not accept funding from raffles. So you have to use basically a 503 an established 503C's bank account that's able to run a credit card transaction. So with Lester's Feet, the organization that I'm starting to do all the woodworking and the SD cards, even if I had the paperwork signed today, it would not meet the requirements of an established 503C. It basically keeps people from popping up what is considered nonprofits to run illegal gambling out of. So I have a conference call tomorrow, and if we can't get it worked out, there is a friend that works with a 503c nonprofit that focuses on kids with cancer. That they're willing to help out on it. So regardless, we'll have the logistics and the timing worked out. Once we get past that, then we can start promoting, putting a list of different things and accepting some of these donations. So we appreciate everybody reaching out, and we'll let you know when things are coming. We haven't said for sure yet, but as of right now, I think the hunts on my farm and Don's farm are the only hunts that we're going to include in the raffle, because it's the only ones we can control. So hope everybody understands that. But there'll be a lot of different things in there that hopefully we can get a lot of publicity and raise a lot of money for these families that are suffering right now.
Yeah, we're just, as Terry said, trying to get the legalities out of the way before we move forward too fast. Everything we do is legal and legit and upfront, and that's the way this will be. And until those loose ends are tied up, we won't be announcing too much more on the raffle. But rest assured, it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon, as soon as we get those things taken care of.
Yep. So there'll be different opportunities to basically hang out and eat dinner and just be one of the boys with Don and I over the next hunting season. This will happen for 2021 hunting season. Real quick update from the Ward family. I got a text message from Karen, who is the mother of Adley and Tinley. I'm not going to even be able to pronounce a lot of these big medical terms, but the gist of it is they got to go home. If you remember last episode, they got to go back home to down around Elizabethtown, Kentucky, but had to come back up to Cincinnati this last Monday. Tinley got her labs done on Thursday and got good results from that. But Thursday, Adley went back, and I guess the procedure is a bone marrow aspiration, spinal tap, and spinal chemo. But I guess the results were not stating that she was put into remission. So I hope that I'm not misrepresenting the update of it, but they got good news and not so good news, not bad news, but not what they were hoping for. So they're going to be back at Children's in Cincinnati, I think, this week, and I'm going to try to get with them, and we've raised quite a bit of money from the SD card holders and try to knock off one or two bills for them with the money raised for that. But keep them in your prayers. I know Adley spiked a fever this week, and that's serious whenever you have a child that's going through treatment. So I think there's some issues with liver enzymes and stuff like that. So really, your best way to keep up with the details of this is go to their Facebook page, Team Adley, Team Tinley, and follow that. And we'll have more on how we're helping this family and other families very shortly. What was actually cool this week, though, Don, is, we're not the only ones trying to do good here. Our buddy Rich Hixson over in eastern Ohio, West Virginia, gave a surprise to a guest blogger on the Real World site this week, and Rich kind of hit up the idea to get a Rambo electric bike purchased for a gentleman by the name of Tate Hale, who was a college athlete, had some sicknesses, and ended up having to have his leg amputated. And if you haven't been to Real World's blog and read the story of Tate Hale, I encourage you to do that. He's a very special young man that's reaching out and trying to spread the good news of the Lord, but also encourage people going through rough times and share his story. So it's kind of cool that our buddy Rich did all that work to hook him up with an electric bike so he could run around and hunt this year.
Well, I'm not surprised. I've got to know Rich a little bit. He lives not too far from my Ohio property, and actually he met me there on that property right after we bought it, and I think we was putting up blinds the day he showed up. But just a great guy. He's also a new Real World dealer. So anybody in Southeast Ohio looking for Real World products, look up Rich. Great guy. Follow him on Facebook. He's always posting pictures of his kids. Just a great father to them, and just an example of what a father should be, and as well as a citizen of this country. Looking out for each other.
Right. So it was just kind of cool. Another story of other people trying to make a difference. And the quick end of the story is if you go to the blog, where Tate was talking about how he was in just dealing with a lot of anger. He didn't know the Lord, just in a really bad place, and he had just this complete meltdown in his house. And at that exact moment, somebody knocks on his door, and it was a rabbit hunter. and that rabbit hunter basically had to make the choice: do I walk away or do I try to help this young man? And through a lot of time and effort and prayer, that rabbit hunter ended up, total stranger, bringing Tate to the Lord not too long after that, and started this series of events that now Tate is out trying to make a difference in people's lives. So really cool story. Go out to the Real World website or follow Tate Hale on Facebook or Instagram. You won't be disappointed. But really happy for Tate, and he doesn't like the attention, but Mr. Hixson, tip my hat to you, buddy. Way to use what resources and things God gave you to help others. We appreciate you as far as that. I got a question to ask you, Don.
Well, it wouldn't be a podcast if I wasn't put on the spot at least once.
All right, so this is a question that just popped in my head, and actually, my buddy Danny York and I, who you've met Danny before,
Yep.
We were talking at church this morning about some trail camera pictures that we had both seen here recently, and it was like a light bulb. So my question is, this time of year, especially in our area where we're able to feed, we're getting a ton of pictures of does fighting. So these does are reared back on their back legs and, doing the kangaroo punch. I mean, it seems like every day, and I remember on Facebook, I've just seen a bunch of pictures of does fighting. So my question to you is, to put you on the spot, is it because that so many deer are concentrated at these feeders because it's the only thing to eat right now that we're seeing more of this? Or do you actually think the does get territorial to food sources, especially when there's not as many of them?
Well, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I have no doubt it has to do with the limited food sources and the deer concentrating around them. It's survival of the fittest. The toughest doe, she's going to get to eat first, and
right.
Everybody else is going to wait till she's done. And as deer move in from other properties, strange deer, if you will, they got to work that pecking order out, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. When you had captive deer, did you notice that was the does social, or was there actually a pecking order inside of the does when you had them?
Well, there was definitely a social pecking order. I mean, there was a dominant doe and right on down the line, and every one of them knew where they stood in that order.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never seen aggression get worse this time of the year or anything, because that food source was constant throughout the year.
My gut tells me is it's that way all the time. It's just when there's a 2-acre field of beans there, you don't have them standing right on top of each other trying to stick their nose in the feeder at the same time. So you probably have a little bit more of a scenario this time of year. But
right.
So that was just an interesting question that we got. Let's talk a little bit about frost seeding update. You got some frost seeding done this week, I believe, on your place, didn't you?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, my arms still hurt from carrying around that gas-powered steel leaf blower.
Am I going to have to get you a backpack one for next year?
Nah, I'll get through it. But I typically don't have that much to do, but yesterday I put some fresh seed on all my clover plots, all my clover fire breaks around my native grass fields, had a couple of new spots to plant it. I had a switchgrass field that I just planted last spring and had some spots that the switchgrass didn't take quite as well as it did on the rest of the field. So I spread some more seed in those areas. Then I had a pasture area where the grass was really thin, so I spread some grass seed there. So I did more frost seeding yesterday than I typically would do in about 3 years, and I did it all in about a half a day. So I was slinging that leaf blower around all morning, and my arms felt it at the end of the day.
Now, we're not partnered or have any affiliation with that company, but is that the way to go when you're spreading those small seeds like that? Do you prefer that way than a crank seeder?
No, I do for sure.
Yeah.
Especially the smaller seeds. Now, some of the bigger grass seeds, you might be better off with one of those hand crank spreaders. But you start talking small seed like switchgrass and clover, and even plot topper in the fall. Those blowers are the way to go.
Yeah, I forget what. Do you remember the brand name on yours?
I think it's Extreme Spreader.
Yeah, I think
If you
that's
do
what
a
it
search
is.
for Extreme Spreader, that little container that sits on the top of that blower tube, I'm telling you what, it'll blow it out a lot farther
You just
than you could ever crank it.
Take that tube apart on your blower and then put it back on each end, and then I think there's like a little metering valve or something that controls how much seed drops, right?
Yep, exactly. You drill a hole in your blower tube, and this thing sits down in that hole and drops the seed in there and blows it out. But it's a ticket. If you can get the wind behind you and that thing, well, shoot, you can blow seed a long way.
Yeah, that'd be a great application for double crop when you're trying to walk through a beans or walk along beans or shoot stuff up into corn or something like that would be the ticket there.
Yep.
So, did you? I saw a shed laying on the tailgate. Do you know what buck that was?
I found 3 sheds yesterday, all just right there along where I was seeding. They weren't. One was a 2-year-old buck, an 8-pointer. Found both of those in one of my clover plots, and the other one was probably a 3-year-old. One side off of an 8-pointer. So,
well,
not the big boys, but
yeah, I made a post on my social media that had either 4 or 5 bucks Friday night still holding their antlers. So, there's not a big hurry for me to grip and rip and get out there. And of course, I don't shed hunt a lot anyway. I'll drive the ridge, and I'm not going to muck up my woods from walking through them. But the interesting thing I heard on social media, was it Saturday? I think it was Friday or Saturday. Somebody was bragging about how many sheds they saw, and when they were talking about how many sheds they found, they said, and we jumped up a 170. He was a monster.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
last week on the podcast, I mentioned that with all the bad weather we had just had, that I was sure antlers were just falling right and left. Well, the next day, which was just last Monday, I went out and checked 4 cameras on my farm, and when I looked at those cards, I was looking at several hundred pictures that had been taken in the last 48 hours or so before I pulled the cards. And I would say at that point, 80% of the antlers were still on the buck's head.
Yeah.
And that was just like less than a week ago, be a week ago tomorrow. So I'm sure there's still a lot of antlers attached to the bucks.
Yeah, and I don't know, Patrick and Danny went out, 2 of my buddies that I just mentioned, Danny, but they went out yesterday, and Patrick said, I didn't see it, but he found a fresh shed. It hadn't been down very long, but he said that something that had already, almost chewed all the way through it. But I guess my point to that is and everybody's got their own rhyme or reasoning, but if I have to choose not finding a shed or finding a chewed up shed versus keeping that deer on my property and not boogering him up, I'm going to keep the deer on my property and not booger him up. That's just my opinion. Well,
me too. Talk about discipline. I mean, it takes discipline to stay away. And now I'm with you. I'd rather kill the buck, have him there where I can hunt him and have a good chance to kill him anyway, right, than to find his antlers and run him off in the process.
Yeah. And so many people are just blindly walking. I think that there is some strategy that maybe we need to I'm going to ask you to touch on it here before the Biofarm segment, but I think number one, choosing the right areas to shed hunt. If you have an area that might not keep and hold a lot of deer in late season, it's more of an early season area, is it really worth tromping up? The second thing is that how you shed hunt. So I'm gonna put you on the spot again. Let's visualize a football field. So we got 50 yards wide, and 100 yards long. And let's say it's just a blend of cover and food in different places, not a section block like you'd have out west where, you might have one little patch of woods. But let's say there's woods and on both sides of the football field, just diverse and equal. Do you start at one side of that football field and walk to the other side? Do you start in the middle and walk towards the outsides, or do you start in one side, then stop and circle around and walk back the other way?
Well, on my farm, what I do is I'll start at one end and walk to like the 50-yard line and turn around and come back. So I'm only really walking half the property. And the idea is that if I push the deer off of that first half, they just go to the second half where I'm not going to push them the rest of the way off. And so I'm not pushing them off the property. I'm just pushing them to the other side of the property. And, then I might not even do the other half of the football field till the next day or a different day.
Right.
And because those deer aren't going to want to run right back to where they were just jumped by somebody.
Right.
But give them a day or two to settle down, then go to the other side and come back halfway the other direction. And it don't always work. Sometimes you'll bust them out of there, but you're only putting pressure on half of it, and the deer does not have to leave. Right. So that's kind of been my approach.
And, every farm has different access and how you can walk it, and the topography plays a big role, as flat ground in the Midwest, pushing a deer over flat country is different than real hilly ground in, eastern Ohio or Kentucky or whatever. So start thinking a little bit when you're shed hunting, instead of just doing a mass grid search from one side to the other. Strategically do it to where if you do bump deer, you're bumping them to another area that is safe on the farm. So just something to think about.
Yeah, and if you're doing a small property, it really doesn't matter. I mean,
true.
It's not like you can walk 40 acres and only do 20 of it and not have an effect on the other 20.
That's right.
So what I'm talking, your property's got to be big enough and it's got to lay out in such a way that you can do that.
Right. Every property is a little bit different.
Yep.
All right, well, stay tuned for updates on the raffle. We should have some key information to that coming up. Again, if you're going to be at the Iowa Deer Classic, go out and visit Don. I don't want to waste too much time here because we got 3 questions that each question is a little bit longer, but they're good, and I think they're going to take up quite a bit of time on the podcast tonight. So if it's all right with you, I think Wayne Keller's got a good property to talk about for the Buy a Farm segment. Is that good?
Yep, sounds good to me.
BuyAFarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
Okay, this week I picked another property I think is a good starter property for someone. It's fairly small. It's only 55 acres in St. Clair County, Illinois, which is not too far from St. Louis. It's a good mix of cropland and wooded acreage. There's like 21 and a half acres of cropland with the rest in woods. It's not far from the Kaskaskia River. It's about a mile north of the Kaskaskia River. Excellent whitetail hunting. It's about 6 miles from Freeburg, Illinois. But it's real close to St. Louis. It's a good starter property. Taxes on this 55 acres is only $525 a year. You can see it. There's actually some drone footage of this property as well as a lot of photos. If you go to buyafarm.com, the listing agent is Wayne Keller. I'm sure Wayne would be glad to show it to you. His number is 618-71679. Give Wayne a call and tell him you want to see the 55 acres in St. Clair County.
Well, I swiveled in my chair, and I don't know whether it was the connection on my headset, but in my ear, the phone number broke up a little bit, so I don't want to have to go back and edit that in post-production. Can you just give Wayne's phone number one more time, just in case it wasn't on my headset?
Okay, Wayne Keller, you can be reached at 407-1679.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks to the folks at Buy a Farm. Please visit their website and their Facebook page. A lot of good stuff there. And tell them that their friends at Chasing Giants sent you. So you've been shipping out, or Robin's been shipping out hats and T-shirts. So everybody, we're close to caught up yet on the T-shirt side?
We are caught up. So
Okay.
if you ordered one or you submitted a question and you didn't get your free T-shirt yet, you will soon. Those have all been shipped. So be patient. The post office has been unusually slow here the last few months.
Yep.
But your items have shipped.
So the other thing is, for the people that have bought a T-shirt or hat and an SD card holder, as you guys know, I put that SD card holder that we're doing for Lester's Feet, I put that on Don's website, so they do not ship together. So Don is shipping T-shirts and hats from his place. I'm shipping the SD cards from here. So don't freak out when you get a hat in the mail or an SD card holder and it's not your full order. They're just coming from two different places. So any guesses, Don, on how many of those SD card holders we've sold so far? What's your guess?
I don't know, but you've sold a bunch of them that I've just through my website, not to mention others that you've sold. But
yeah, we're up into triple digits now. We just went over 100 of those things.
I'm not surprised. I think you're just getting started, actually.
Yeah, so also visit our friends at Exodus Trail Cameras. I believe their website is Exodus Outdoor Gear. I made a version of their logo on one, so if you like it and use Exodus Trail Cameras, go and buy it there. Same price, just different branding. So we appreciate those guys, Chad, Cameron, and Jake. We appreciate you guys and picking up the pieces in that. And by the way, they're a Real World dealer now too.
Yeah, awesome.
So Northeast Ohio, if you're around their new office, you can pick up Real World products in there as you're getting your trail cameras. So saying that, let's move on to our questions for the week.
Okay, the first question is submitted by Michael Riley from Hale, Michigan. Michael says, "Hello, Don and Terry. I'm a new listener to your podcast, and I'm slowly listening to each one to catch up to the new ones. I have tried to listen to multiple outdoor channel type shows before to try and educate myself about deer hunting and land management, and I never found any outlet that I felt satisfied that need until listening to Chasing Giants. I most likely should have waited until I got through them all, but at this point I think I could write a book of questions for you both and need to get at least one into your hands before I continue. So to get to my question, and my question is about access. And every time Don is discussing this topic, I really try to visualize my property and my spots that I feel would be successful and how I can access those points correctly to be effective. I have been listening to multiple interactions and answered questions on this topic from both of you, but I'm still on the fence about accessing a stand that I have where I need to walk through about 200 yards of wooded area to get to a stand closer to a neighbor's ag bean field, all while staying in the boundaries of my property. My hunting area is about 80-acre spot with 40 acres is hay for livestock and 40 is woods that has a neighboring property on three sides. And those neighbors hunt and don't really want to give me access to the back of the property through theirs, and I don't blame them. I feel like maybe I'm in one of those situations where I really only have the one access point and truly will have the most success by just staying out of the woods. But this particular spot looks very enticing. So Don and Terry, do you strictly access stands through open areas like my hayfield using different screens where you can go undetected, or a fence line where you can cover a bit better? Or have you had any success accessing stands by cutting through the woods to get to a landlocked perimeter spot that in my case is closer to a 100-acre bean field where I see a lot of deer activity? Thanks for the podcast and your willingness to share your management and hunting experiences with the hunting community." Well, Michael, access is everything when it comes to tree stands. If you don't have a good access, you don't have a good stand, period. What you're describing, I see it all the time when I'm walking these properties on consulting visits or whatever. It seems like everybody wants to go to the far back of their property and sit the back fence line. And the closer they can get to that neighbor, the better off they like it. And that neighbor, he's coming clear through his property to get to that same back fence line. And, in both cases, the hunter's walking through the heart of their property to get to the back. And what are they doing? Most of the time in the process of getting to the back of their property, they're just pushing those deer off. It sounds like that you're trying to get back to the back of the property because that's where the best food source is at, that bean field that you described. You got to know where these deer are coming from and where they're going to. I mean, it's to be successful or take your success to the highest level. It's not just simply going out and hunting sign or hunting places where you see a lot of deer. You got to know where those deer are coming from and where they're going to. That's where it all starts. Access is everything, but you got to know that buck is going from point A, where he's bedding, to point B, where he's feeding, or vice versa, and then get set up in between him. No, I don't always access my stands across open terrain or open fields or whatever. There's a lot of different ways. You can use creeks, for example, to access stands, or ravines. A lot of times in more hilly country, I'll work from the top or from the bottom up towards the top through a ravine where it's less likely to jump deer. But you just got to know where those deer are at and where you expect them to go, and then you plan your access around that.
You helped me come up with some ideas on my place, I think 2 years ago, and similar situation. I don't go into my woods. I try to hunt edges until it's the rut, and then I might go down into a finger that feeds from like 4 hollers down into one point. That's a big pinch, but outside of the rut, I'm not going in the woods. The thing that you helped me kind of get a plan on a couple years ago, Don, was we basically, instead of changing where the food was on my property, because that really wasn't negotiable. That's kind of like what this guy's talking about. He can't change where the neighbor's big ag field is, but we changed where the bedding was on my property. So we let certain areas grow up and took out other areas of bedding to truly get a path and where I could have the intersection point from bedding to food in between them that was accessible. So those bucks are there because it's not accessible. That's why a mature buck's going to stay there. He feels safe. So if you go tromping in there, you're going into where he feels he's safe and probably busting him out. So we don't know what this property's like, whether he can change his bedding or what he can do. But topography works for access. I've put round bales out in a straight row and used those to block going in and out. I've planted corn. I've planted upland game blend. Started putting miscanthus on our property. So there's all different ways that you can access through or around the open field. But I don't try to walk through the middle of the woods at any time.
No, you got to know what the deer are doing. You got to know where they're bedding, where they're going to feed. So
okay.
So thanks for the question, Michael. Free T-shirt, Chasing Giants T-shirt coming your way. Next question comes from Jody Hooks from Uniontown, Ohio. Jody says, Don and Terry, thank you for taking my question and keep up the great work. I learn a lot from you two each week, and not all of it has to do with deer. My question involves rice bran, cotton hulls, and peanuts. I see the social media army confusing what attracts deer compared to what is good for them. How deer will walk right through this food to get to that one. But rarely do you hear how the deer are affected long term. Case in point is more than half the deer that travel my land are foundered to some degree, which probably has resulted from 6 months of corn piles on everyone's property around me. What are some of the pros and cons of using rice bran and cotton hulls for deer, and how does it relate to their health? Thanks, and keep up the good fight. Oh, let's see. Well, rice bran is a good, there's a product that is really high in fat. There's not a lot of things out there in the deer's natural browse or that a deer can find naturally that high in fat, so that they can get that from the rice bran. The cotton hulls, are higher in protein and offer some fiber as well. So they're good for the deer's diet. Really variety is the key. That's why I always suggest diverse food plots, a complete system where you got greens and grains. And you can even break it down further, your greens are legumes like clover and alfalfa. And you got your cereal grains like oats and wheat. And then you can take it to the bulb plants, the turnips, the radish, sugar beets, things like that. Variety. And the reason for that is that each of these different food sources offer something different than the rest. For example, soybeans are a lot higher in protein than corn. Corn has the carbohydrates. And just on and on. So, I don't see anything wrong with feeding rice bran and cotton hulls as part of your feed mix. In fact, the more different ingredients, the better, as long as you end up with a well-balanced ration.
Right. Yeah, and he mentioned peanuts. I'm doing some testing with that right now at my place. So, I guess there's some confusion. Maybe you can touch on it just a little bit. I'm sure we'll stir the pot with a lot of habitat management Facebook groups about you're going to founder your deer, but touch on a little bit about the different scenarios of causing founder and, feeding too much corn, because every situation's different. If you're in the mountains of West Virginia and you put out 1,000 pounds of corn and they come in there and gorge themselves, that's different than standing row crops in Missouri or Illinois where they've eaten corn all year, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's what they're used to, and any ruminant can be foundered or can founder on too much corn, but if it's part of their diet, every day, and it's not, you can't just start pouring the corn to them when they have never had it before. You got to slowly work them up on it so their system gets used to it. And, these deer in the Midwest where there's cornfields everywhere, yeah, they can handle the corn that the people put out in their bait piles or whatever a little bit better, or a lot better than someplace, like in West Virginia, where there is no cornfield, and then you start dumping the corn out to them deer, and yeah, they're going to founder. So we gotta, if we're going to supplemental feed, we need to do it with a balanced ration. It's not, pouring corn out in a feeder, in my opinion, is not supplemental feeding. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're just, it's more like baiting than anything.
Right.
Even if it happens outside of season, that's not supplementing the deer's diet, right, with a nutritious food source. It'd be no different than throwing a bunch of candy to your kids and saying that you're giving them a well-balanced diet.
Or a high salt-based mineral. It's the same thing. You're attracting deer. Exactly. You're not doing something for their health.
Yeah.
So I really like the peanuts so far, to be honest with you. A couple of our listeners to the podcast hooked me up with some leads on how to get them in bulk. Just the wrong time of year right now, so I'm on the waiting list for some bulk right now. But talking to a couple other nutritionists and people who've worked in the livestock industry, we really like the idea of having those shells too, for two reasons. Number one, the fiber in the shell But also the scratchiness of it. You know, I don't. You are more into livestock than I am, but there's scuffing up that rumen a little bit. You know, helps absorb that nutrient.
You know, that's a great point, Terry. And I don't know if I've ever talked about it on here. The subject's ever come up, you know, but that's one of the things I learned with the captive deer is they need that roughage. And, you know, alfalfa hay is what I would use for roughage in the wintertime. And those stems, those alfalfa stems, when the deer eat it and they digest it, that stem scratching the inside of the rumen, you know, just stimulates the production of more bacteria to break down the food sources. So that's a great point. And, you know, peanuts are a fantastic food source.
But you're just not going to get that with shell corn. You know, shell corn is just going to can pass right through and digest what it can. You're not going to scratch that rumen. So, you know, a lot of people, when it got really, really cold, were throwing out alfalfa with some corn mixed into it and a little mineral. That's great. You know, that's scratching that up. But that's what the most kind of low-hanging fruit for me in finding peanuts that with still the shells is the fiber and then the scratchiness of that, just more of an abrasion when it goes down through the rumen. So that's what I'm after of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jody asked about the pros and cons of these ingredients, and you know one of the big cons is the price sometimes, and the availability and the shipping cost to get it to you. If you don't live where, you know, rice bran is produced or peanuts are produced or whatever, it's expensive to have that stuff shipped to you.
Yeah, I bought a 25-pound bag of peanuts at Rural King for $30. So, you know, you start thinking about supplemental feeding with that. Of course, you don't feed just straight peanuts either.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, trying to mix it up and kind of put your ration, you know, Real World's complete feed, it kind of balances itself out. And, you know, you want that fat content, that oil content, and the protein together. So it's not just a matter of putting one thing out. Diversity is the key in whatever you're doing, Jody.
Yep, for sure. So thanks for your question, Jody. You too will be getting a free Chasing Giants t-shirt.
All right. We got time for one more.
Last one comes from Clayton Rent from Aviston, Illinois. Says, hey, Don and Terry, I've listened to almost all of your podcasts. Had you come develop plans for 2 properties that I hunt and been to your master class. So needless to say, you've answered many questions of mine. But I do have a couple of questions. A few years ago, I received the book, Strategic Harvest System, How to Break Through the Buck Management Glass Ceiling. I've often thought about the content while hunting, and then a couple of weeks ago, you brought up this topic, and I don't think I've ever heard you discuss it before. These questions are numbered. Number 1, in regards to shooting the smaller antlered bucks in each age class, as the deer get older, I see fewer and fewer of them in person. Generally, I know they're around because of trail camera pictures at night. So I can usually get an idea of specific bucks, since they become more unique with age, that I would consider shooting before I actually have a live encounter with them. However, the smaller 1-year-olds tend to look a lot alike. If I were to move forward with a plan to shoot at least one young inferior buck each year, would it be as simple as shooting the 1-year-old 4-pointer or spike instead of the 1-year-old 6 or 8-pointer? Or is it still just a crapshoot as to which deer will grow to be bigger? I'm going to go ahead and answer this question before I read number 2. We're going to forget what question number 1 was. Clayton, I don't think that shooting yearling bucks is a good idea if you're trying to manage for bigger deer. There's just too many things that can affect that first rack, like date of birth. When you get a buck that was born, you know, in May, for example, versus one born in August, their first racks are probably going to reflect those birth dates as much as anything. With the earlier born buck fawn, you know, having the better rack that first year. By year 2, they've pretty much evened out, and you get a whole lot better idea of what that deer is going to end up like. So I'm not a big fan of culling yearling bucks. Typically, though, I can say from my captive deer experience, that typically the best buck in each age class is going to be the same best buck as they move on. For example, you take a group of bucks that are all yearlings, the best yearling in that group is probably going to be the best 2-year-old in that group, is probably going to be the best 3-year-old in that group. And that just seems to follow. But when we start talking about wild deer, I just think it's a big mistake to try to cull those 1-year-old bucks. You want to add anything there, Terry, before I move on to number 2?
Well, I just pulled up and looked at number 2, and I want to ask a question of you before you go on. So, Clayton, I'm sorry for hijacking your question here before he moves on. You just mentioned something, though, that I'm curious about. So let's say we have a crop of yearling bucks that comes out, and we know the importance of fetal programming and the health of the doe at the point in time which that fetus is in the womb. When you just mentioned that some bucks are born at the normal time and some bucks are born a month or 2 later, based on our previous episodes, we've talked about that was probably a first-year doe that came into heat late as her body weight got up enough to carry being pregnant, right? So that would be why
Exactly.
she's having that's why she's having the fawn a month or 2 later. Is there any correlation to fetal programming as it relates to a basically yearling doe that's pregnant versus a 4 or 5-year-old doe that is able to handle it from a nutrient standpoint, from a food intake, and just the strength of that animal itself? So you might have 5 yearlings or 10 yearling bucks that we're looking at in a sample size, but if 3 of those are from a mother who was a year and a half old, they're born a month and a half later. They don't have that jump start, and they might not have as good a head start with fetal programming. So, that might set apart what we're seeing, what he's talking about. You might have a fork corner, a small 6 or 8 pointer that first year. But I'm just curious, does that first year reproduction cycle of a doe, did you ever see anything with that they just don't live up to any potential, but the second, third year they're pregnant, they're better?
Oh, that's a great observation, Terry, but I really...
Did I stump you?
Yeah, I think you did.
Oh, we're going to have to think about this a little bit more then. Maybe you can stew on that while you're driving across the country this week.
Well, that year, or that doe fawn, when she's getting bred, before her first birthday, she's not done growing herself. So
Right.
A lot of the nutrition she's taking in is going to be going to her own growth as well as the growth of those fetuses within her.
Right.
So I would think that would put those fawns at somewhat of a disadvantage versus fawns that are born to a mature doe, who's
Right.
done all her growing. All the nutrition she's taking in is just basically going to her own maintenance as well as the production of the fetus.
So it's an observation, just a talking point that's kind of curious and probably no way to ever prove it. But Clayton, to get back to what your question is, there would be no way to know which of those deer are when they're a yearling buck anyway. So it's hard to identify which one of those are a little bit of step behind inside the age class until they get 2 or 3.
Yep.
No, you're going to stew on this, aren't you?
Yeah, I'll be giving it some thought driving down the road. You can bet on that.
All right, well, what's the second question Clayton's got?
Second question, can this approach be effective with 6 hunters on 300-plus acres? I would rather shoot a young buck than a doe. More meat, not losing future offspring, etc. I prefer greater numbers of deer than I do having one huge buck that I may or may not kill. I've got kids, and I want them to have a positive experience when they begin hunting. Thanks, guys. Clayton. As Clayton mentioned, I've been to his property, did a consultation on it. Actually, 2 properties for him, and he's been to my master class. Having seen your properties, Clayton, I don't believe you're in a situation where you're going to have much effect at all on the local deer herd. And the reason for it, I'm sure you can relate to how your properties are in an area where there's a whole lot more cover, more deer than there is on my property, which you visited. I've got some control, not much because it is a wild herd, but my property is kind of an island out in a sea of ag fields. And the deer that I have are the deer that I have. There's not that much movement in and out of my property, so to speak, whereas your property, with all the surrounding cover very close, there's a lot of deer moving in and out, and I just don't think that you're going to have that much impact on the bucks that are there. Does that mean that you shouldn't try it? No. I mean, I definitely support you shooting the smaller bucks in each age class. I just don't think that you shooting yearling bucks instead of does is going to get you where you want to be. What I really like is your last sentence there, and where you mentioned the kids and you want them to have a positive experience. That's what it's all about. It's having fun, and I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the management end of things, as far as you can't shoot this deer and this is the one you got to shoot, that we can take some of the fun out of it for those kids. So most of all, have fun. I just don't see shooting yearling bucks as having a positive impact, but at the same time, I don't think that we should be telling beginning hunters what deer they can shoot. If it's legal, in my opinion, we ought to at least let them get a few deer under their belt before we start enacting more strict rules in terms of management.
Well, I think we have to put aside what our philosophy is and how we do things if someone wants different goals. So you and I can sit back and Don and I can talk about different things we want to do, but we kind of have the same goals. You're shooting a different class deer than I am, but we're shooting the same age structure deer. We're wanting to kill those bucks 5.5 years or older every year. That's not what everybody wants out of the sport. So we got to remember that the way we're doing it isn't necessarily the way that everybody else is going to get there. And you got kids, you might not have kids. Everybody's got a different goal, a different path, a different journey. That's why I have a different farm that I hunt with the kids than the different farm that I hunt that I have a chance to kill a giant on. And the farm that I have a shot to kill a big one on, I don't see that many deer, but it might be a place that I get a big one. And it's different objectives and different goals. And I think that we get too stuck into my way or the highway, or this is right, this is wrong, and pushing our wants and desires onto other people. Sometimes it's we can help steer people with like-minded goals, but you can't hunt like Don and I do and expect to take a group of kids out every year and see a bunch of deer in the food plot. It just that doesn't necessarily align all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, another good comparison is my farm, which is 120 acres, and the lease we have, which is 100 acres.
Right.
Two totally different properties. They're not that far apart. They're probably 15 miles or so apart, but they're totally different. As I said, my home farm, the 120, is isolated, surrounded by open ag fields. The 100-acre lease we have is surrounded by timber, and there's hunters, right there, yards from our property line. and it is darn near impossible to get a mature buck on that farm. I mean, there's nice bucks there, don't get me wrong, but the bucks that are typically seen on camera and while hunting on the 100-acre lease are not quite up to par with the bucks that are seen, on my 120 acres year in and year out.
Right.
So,
and if you drove by the two properties, you would think the lease would hold more bucks than your farm if you just drove by it.
It's got way more cover. That 100-acre lease has way more cover than my 120-acre farm. It's got really good thick cover. It's got enough food. It's got plenty of. I mean, there's 3 food plots there that we'll still have food in them late in the winter. But it's the pressure. It's what's around them. When it comes to properties, people look at properties, but they don't look past the property line, especially when they're looking to buy a property. Well, what sits around a property is every bit as important, if not more so, than the property itself. You can have one of the best properties on the planet, but if it's surrounded by a bunch of killmongers, guess what? You're going to have a hard time growing some big deer there.
Yep.
And
it doesn't mean that even on your home farm you haven't had target bucks that were 2 and 3 years old you had your eye on that still got shot. I mean, it's not like you're removed completely from that scenario, even out in the middle of nowhere where you're at now.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of people seem to think that, I've got this magical place and all the big bucks I shoot are just because of that. Well, I just lost a buck this fall, a 2-year-old with 15 points that I'm telling you what, that buck had 200 inches written all over him in a couple of years. And, neighbor killed him about a mile away. So I still lose him too. But Clayton's property, from my experience being on it, his property is closer to the lease than it is to my home farm. And, if we would go in on that lease, Terry, and we'd try to start culling bucks to allow certain ones to live to older age classes, well, basically all we're doing is we're determining which bucks the neighbors get to shoot.
Right.
As much as anything.
And there was the neighbor killed the real old buck that Wes wanted to shoot this year. And, there was at different points in time, we had probably 4 bucks at 150 or bigger, but no giants. They were all probably maybe 145 to 160, 165 at different points in time. But, that pressure it's still a good spot. I think we can still do things to increase our chances there. That's why we still have it. If it wasn't worth it, we wouldn't have it. It's not like I said, you drive by it, you'd think it would be a whole lot better than what it is. And you drive by your place and think, no way. It's just how
it's all about pressure.
It's how it works. So,
yep.
Great question, Clayton. So appreciate it.
Yep, Clayton, you'll be getting a T-shirt as well. Appreciate the questions that were submitted. And we're getting a lot of good questions. I mean, I had to really weed out some really good ones this week to get these 3, and I just tried to kind of mix it up this week with some. We had the question on the food ingredients, and this one was on culling. So,
well, we're going to get through a period of time here through March where every week where our episode is actually going to be from the master class. So how it works is on Friday night, I'll arrive, and the folks that are traveling and maybe some of our local buddies that live close to Don's will come over for pizza or whatever, and we'll actually record the podcast on Friday night instead of Sunday night live. I want to dabble a little bit with videoing it and upload the video of it on YouTube, not just the audio. But we'll get through that through the month of March. My guess is in April, before we get into big planning season for spring plots, we might need to just take a couple episodes and make them all about questions, because you don't want to hear me complaining about turkey hunters for 6 weeks straight. So.
Well, we got enough questions in the bank. we'd be good the rest of the year. But
yeah, we probably need to, after master class time, get through that and then just make a couple episodes where it's just questions. So I think people might like that. So regardless, don't let it discourage you. If you've submitted a question, we'll do our best to make it align with the topics for that night, and we appreciate the interaction that we're getting. We want to talk about the stuff you guys want to, not just the rambling of mechanical broadheads and love swings. So, but the occasionally getting Don fired up. Hey, by the way, I guess Trump got on TV today. Did you see that?
I didn't.
So evidently he got on there.
I give up on TV.
Well, I saw it, and it was just a blurb on my phone. So I guess somebody posted that there's a chance that he could run for, I forget what they said, he could run for in the state of Florida for a 2-year term and be maybe Speaker of the House, impeach the president and vice president, and then run again for president in 2024.
Well, you want to get me off on a tangent? Here we go. Here's the thing. We lost this election with a sitting president. There's no chance that he's going to win again.
You're right.
He couldn't win when he was in charge. He did win. He had more votes, and he won, and yet he's not in office.
Yep.
It's over. I'm telling you, this country's doomed. The Republicans will, and I'm about disgusted with the Republicans. I'll be hard pressed to ever vote Republican again. But it doesn't matter who they put forward. By the time 4 years is up, the deck is going to be so stacked against them that they'll never win. It's over.
I had to get you going about something today. It was too mellow.
Yeah.
It was too mellow on this episode.
Yeah. I quit watching TV, and then here you go to fire me up on the podcast. There we go.
That's all right. Hey, we mentioned last week we picked up we're going to be wearing Vengeance camo this year. That website is up. So be watching for that, and we're going to try to get some Vengeance camo hats done here in the near future. So be watching out for that too. So pretty good looking stuff. If you sell the pictures of Mel and some of the video footage on Don's YouTube channel, Chasing Giants, you've seen that Vengeance camo. Looks really, really nice. Don wore a prototype suit of it. This stuff's starting to get out on the street a little bit more. I've seen more pictures posted about it, so make sure you're paying attention to that. So with that, Don, if you don't have anything else or want to talk politics, we better sign off. We're a little over time.
Well, I've already offended half of our listeners. Probably that we better just go ahead and sign off there. All right, we want to thank our sponsors, Buy a Farm, 360 Hunting Blinds, Vengeance Camo, Vortex Optics, Lone Wolf Tree Stands, Matthews Archery, Quiet Cat, and Real World Wildlife Products. Have a good week, everyone.